Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirikoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about fantasy football. And you may be thinking to yourself, Andrew, isn't the fantasy football season over? Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. And there's a lot of fantasy football left to be played. If you're someone like me and you can't get enough of playing fantasy football, well, you might want to participate in an NFL playoffs draft where you go ahead and participate in a redraft league where you go ahead and compete against 6 others, draft a team at the quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end positions, then compete against thousands across the fantasy football landscape in order to win yourself some money. Again, for those of you who play in leagues and perhaps your league mates are a little bit salty after losing to you in your respective championship and you can't convince them to play in an NFL playoffs league, well, you can go ahead and join via Underdog Fantasy, and that's exactly what we're going to go ahead and do today. We're going to draft a team for the NFL playoffs and go ahead and talk about some pick'em slips. And a lot of that can be done via Underdog Fantasy here, which is currently right behind me on screen. If you guys haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, there's a link down in the description of the video. If you sign up today using promo code Andrew, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. So if anything you see today is something of interest, go ahead and sign up and start playing fantasy football the Underdog way and for the NFL playoffs, because your season doesn't have to end via week 17 or 18. It can continue till February. So let's go ahead and let's talk about some NFL playoff drafts. Now, specifically, let's talk about strategy before we get into our draft today. A lot of the strategy that pretty much revolves around the NFL playoffs is being able to get teams, or specifically players, that are going to get to the NFL Super Bowl. And if you want to go ahead and successfully do so and draft those players, oftentimes what you're going to have to probably do is draft players that are from the number 1 or 2 seed from the AFC or NFC. And I'll specifically tell you why. Since 2013, there's only been one team from the AFC and NFC that has made the Super Bowl that has not been the number 1 or 2 seed. Again, that's since 2013. And the only team that's been able to accomplish that was this last season's Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Can you imagine that? Every other team that has made the Super Bowl has been the number 1 or 2 seed. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Andrew, typically the strategy going into one of these drafts is to stack 2 teams. Go ahead and draft all the respective players from, let's say, for example, the Green Bay Packers and the Tennessee Titans, and hope they both make the Super Bowl. Or the Green Bay Packers and Kansas City Chiefs, considering they're number 1 and 2 seeds. Well, it's going to be difficult to do so because you're drafting against other people. There are ADPs, and those players from those respective teams, they come off the board relatively quickly. So instead of going ahead and just drafting 2 teams and stacking 2 teams, though we would like to do so, it's going to be difficult to stack teams of that caliber, considering we expect those teams to get to the Super Bowl. So what you'll probably often have to do is have a 2-team stack, depending on where you're drafting, and also include 2 other teams that you have pivot options toward. For example, if I am under the impression that the Tennessee Titans are going to make the Super Bowl, and I'm going to go ahead and draft A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry, and Ryan Tannehill for my respective team, well, I want to also go ahead and, just in case I'm not able to get teams from the NFC side of the board, grab a couple other options that may end up winning a couple rounds, or at least that player may have themselves multiple games under their belt to gain myself more value as my team is trying to gain as many points as possible throughout the NFL playoffs. So perhaps I want to go ahead and draft players from the Cincinnati Bengals and stack them with the Tennessee Titans. And on the other side, take Green Bay Packers and stack them with perhaps Dallas Cowboys. You have to make sure that if you're drafting teams from the same side of the respective board, NFC or AFC, that they're not playing each other within the first round of the playoffs, because you don't want half of your value to be completely decimated because one team eliminating the other. Outside of that, a couple other stats that I wanted to mention. In the last 3 seasons, the 2018, 2019, and 2020 NFL playoffs, we have seen the first round of the playoffs be absolutely insanity, specifically via teams that are the lower seed winning their respective matchups. In fact, here are the stats. In 2018, in the wild card weekend, teams that were the away team won 3 out of the 4 games. In 2019, it was the exact same statistic. 3 out of the 4 games, the away team won. And this last year in the 2020 playoffs, 4 of the 6 games were victories from the away teams. In the wild card weekend as of late, it doesn't matter if you're the home team. Teams like the Dallas Cowboys have to be careful. Teams like the Los Angeles Rams, they have to be careful. And there's always a possibility that we may see an upset special come along. And maybe that's the teams that you want to go and invest in. Maybe go ahead and pick up some Cardinals, because we know Kyler Murray plays better on the road than he does at home. And the Cardinals will most likely never play a home game throughout the playoffs if they're going to proceed and try to get to the Super Bowl. Another option there. Now, specifically, I wanted to go ahead and check if the away teams had just as much success, not only in the wild card round, but in the second round of the NFL playoffs. Well, specifically in the last 3 years, the away teams have been awful in the second round of the playoffs. In fact, in 2018, they lost every single game. They were 0-4. Away teams were 1-3 the next year, 1-3 in the next year. So home teams in the second round of the playoffs are specifically better. Obviously, because those are the better teams. We're talking about number 1 and 2 seeds, number 3 seeds that are absolutely dominating against these lesser teams that may have been able to play upset special in the wild card round, but came back down to earth in the second round of the NFL playoffs. Now, in the NFC Championship game, it's almost a 50-50 split. Whoever gets there, it's anybody's week to end up potentially making the Super Bowl. So I just wanted to go ahead and throw that out there for those of you who are potentially thinking about investing in, players that are on teams that may not be the highest overall seed. What I've seen thus far is that a lot of people are ignoring the potential of the Cardinals or the Las Vegas Raiders and not giving them enough respect, even though they're the number 5 seeds in their respective divisions. Now, before we begin getting into the draft, I want to go ahead and show you guys a draft that I conducted during week 13. In fact, it was a Leonard Fournette thumbnail video. I talked about strength of schedule. Then I talked about the NFL playoffs. And I went ahead and drafted a team. I'm going to go ahead and throw that up on screen right now. So during this draft, this was, again, conducted in week 13 of the 2021 fantasy football season. That was like almost 2 months ago now. Just putting it in perspective. This is a team that I was able to build for an NFL playoff streak. Now, obviously, at the time, a lot of the injuries and a lot of the craziness that has happened to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had not happened yet. But I was able to pretty much stack 2 teams, one in which I was able to get a couple Titans and a lot of respective Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And though I wasn't able to collect all the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because Chris Godwin went early, etc., I was able to get pieces from respective teams like OBJ for the Rams or Damian Harris from the New England Patriots that may be able to help contribute to my team in the long run. We'll see how this team goes, but either way, now that we've talked about this, let's hop into an NFL playoffs draft and give you guys some perspective as to how I want to go ahead and progress into the draft and how I'm going to switch up my strategy based on where I'm picking and what people around me end up doing, because there's not a singular formula and there isn't a singular way of approaching this draft to find 100% success, because every draft is different and every time you could end up with a completely different player drafted even from the same spot. So we'll go ahead and hop into that right now. This time around, I am selecting at the back end of the first round. I have the 6th overall selection and I have the 7th overall selection, so 1.6 and 2.1. Again, like I was mentioning, I want to probably go ahead and try to just stack 2 teams. If I can go ahead and do so with the potential pivot option and fully commit to those teams, then I'll go ahead and try that. Now, in order to do so, 2 players from their own respective team need to drop to me. If, in fact, I'm in a scenario where we have Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs both available at the back end of the first round, beginning of the second round, I will more than happily stack both those players. Then go ahead and in the 3rd/4th round, try to grab Devin Singletary to pretty much, solidify the trifecta and the 3 most important pieces of the Buffalo Bills offense. But again, it's all up to whether or not players that are around me in this respective draft are going to go ahead and take the player that I want. If they go ahead and do so, then I'll have to pivot accordingly, and we'll see where this draft respectively takes us. With the first 3 picks of this respective draft in a half PPR scoring format going wide receiver. Again, we all know that the wide receiver position has a boatload of value, but so do running backs, yet they're often kind of undervalued in these respective leagues. Derrick Henry, as I mentioned it, literally is taken off the board. Now, I have one of 2 options here. I either go Kelsey Mahomes, or I go Mike Evans, Tom Brady, or last but not least, I go with Josh Allen here, and I follow that up with Stephon Diggs. And I just take my Buffalo Bills stack, and we try to go to the moon. Now, the following round, like I've mentioned, at this point, I want to confirm and make sure that I'm able to get Devin Singletary. The way that he has played in the last month of the season, he has been one of the best running backs in terms of fantasy football and getting opportunity. So if I'm able to, by the time this round comes back around to me in the 3rd, at back end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th, if I'm able to get Devin Singletary, I'd be a very happy man. Outside of him, where else am I looking? Like I mentioned, I want to also have players on the other side of the bracket. So I'm looking for Dallas Cowboys potentially. So let's go ahead. Let's grab some of these Dallas Cowboys. Let's put Zeke on the list. CeeDee Lamb on the list. Amari Cooper. Where is Mr. Cedric Wilson? Let's go ahead and find him here. He is somewhere on this list, but he is way down. I think Dalton Schultz is also way down. I could actually use the search function here and throw them up on the board. Mr. Dalton Schultz. I mean, there's always a possibility that by the time I get to the position where I want to draft these players, they're just outright gone. But we just have to hope that's not the case. So I've thrown up a lot of the Dallas Cowboys' respective players. If I'm able to, grab a Devin Singletary here, follow that up with CeeDee Lamb, I'd be pretty happy with that overall scenario. If I'm not able to, well, then we'll pivot. Let's say, for example, by the time it comes back around, CeeDee Lamb is still gone. I might be able to still go ahead and grab a bunch of Dallas Cowboys in the hopes that maybe I'm able to just build everyone except for CeeDee Lamb, considering he hasn't played well in fantasy as of late. That being mentioned, a couple players, surprisingly, Mike Evans in the 3rd round. Okay, that's not really much of a surprise, but he kind of lasted very long there overall. All right, so we've gotten to the point where I'm pretty much in a safe space to draft the players I want. I want to go ahead and grab Devin Singletary. I've pretty much solidified the most valuable prospects from the Buffalo Bills. Now I want to go ahead and start grabbing all my respective Dallas Cowboys that I can. Now, by leaving Dak Prescott on the board and leaving that available for someone else to take, it is what it is. I'm willing to go ahead and let someone else have Dak Prescott in the idea that I'm at least able to grab as many of the Dallas Cowboy other players that I've pinned here that I possibly can. So with that said, my next priority probably ends up being Amari Cooper, Dalton Schultz. Ezekiel Elliott is not a guarantee of priority because, again, he hasn't played the best. Of course, he will have touchdown upside, but it is tough considering the injuries that have been, plaguing him, his respective offensive line this season. Of course, Tyron Smith dealing with that as of late, or at least multiple times throughout the season where he's missed time. But we're just going to have to play it by ear. Now that I've pretty much grabbed my running back of choice, though, I mean, the chances are the next running back I take probably doesn't even end up being Zeke because he may not even make it to me. A lot of these players don't. I mean, to be honest, now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of people don't take running backs. So there may be even a possibility where I can just let him stay on the board and just say, forget about it. I don't really care about the Dallas Cowboys running game. They're not going to be winning games via running the ball anyway. Maybe just go ahead and ignore him. Rather take a James Conner a little bit later in this respective draft on the NFC side of the board and just hope that maybe he can get himself at least 2 games throughout this postseason. A possibility there. Amari Cooper coming off the board, not much of a surprise. I knew that was very possible, considering the fact that, of course, I went with Devin Singletary instead. Still happy with that overall. Now, in terms of other options, I still want to potentially get Dawson Knox. I think Cole Beasley, Gabriel Davis are the next best players. Let's put Gabriel Davis on the board. Again, Gabriel Davis the other day, though he didn't play well, had an unbelievable amount of targets. I think truly he is the number 2 receiver ahead of Cole Beasley in this offense. But still, I want to try to grab these players. I want to stack these players as quickly as I can and get the most value for my respective team. Dak Prescott recently taken. Again, like I mentioned, it's the risk that I'm willing to take in this regard. James Conner taken off the board. So be it. Ezekiel Elliott right before me taken off the board. Which running backs are available? So it would probably have to be a Sony Michel grab. Would I do that now? Probably not. I think I would then just go for Josh Jacobs way later in this draft. So with that all said, I'm trying to grab players from these respective teams that I've already begun to, pick away at. I'm taking Dalton Schultz. He's a touchdown machine. If the Dallas Cowboys are going to win a couple games here, he'll certainly be involved in that overall offensive attack. The next probable best pickup here, at this point, I'm actually legitimately worried that the running back position is going to be completely mulched. So I'm picking up Sony Michel. We'll grab that. Again, another one of these pivot teams that I have. I have one team on the AFC side of the ball. I have 2 teams that I'm picking from the NFC. So pretty much just trying to distribute all of my players within 4 respective teams, considering I won't be able to grab all of them from one respective team unless I've decided to completely just stack Raiders and Pittsburgh Steelers or Pittsburgh Steelers and Eagles for the entire draft in hopes that maybe, just maybe, the worst teams in those respective conferences that have made the playoffs can somehow, some way get to the finals, which again is a stretch to say the very least. All right, let's see. What do we have available? I mean, at this point, Josh Jacobs isn't even necessary. The next best running back in this regard would then just be Tony Pollard for me, based on what I'm trying to build here. Quarterback-wise, of course, that certainly needs to be taken care of. I think it's pretty smart. Why can't I... For some reason, there it is. Okay, I was about to say, I was like, for some reason, it's not letting me look at all the quarterbacks there for a second, but that was on me. I was just clicking it the wrong way. I think Ryan Tannehill, not a bad option. Seriously, though. Because in the same regard that if you think they'll at least have 1 to 2 games here, then they'll get majority of the value that you need to get out of them, respectively. So not a bad play there. Now, the people that have drafted around me, have they all taken 2 quarterbacks? No, there are teams that still haven't taken a quarterback. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to grab a second quarterback here. I'm going to follow that. Considering the ADP of Cedric Wilson is relatively low, I think people are probably going to ignore him like we did, or like people did in the last draft. I'll take Dawson Knox here. I'm just going to stack on tight ends. I'm going to hope that when this draft comes back around, somehow, some way, people have ignored some of these options. If they haven't, so be it. But I'm just going to hope. That's the entire point of these drafts. I'm grabbing the players that I think have the highest value, that can help contribute the most in this respective playoff run, and see what we can end up doing here. I mean, a lot of this team is based on the success of the Buffalo Bills. If the Buffalo Bills get eliminated in the first round, I mean, this team is dead in the water completely. And that's just how it's going to work. When you play in a best ball league, that is, especially with elimination, those risks have to be taken in order for you to kind of make it to that next level. So let's see here. We're coming down the line. Mecole Hardman taken, Zach Ertz. Good. People are beginning to ignore the Gabriel Davises of the world. They're grabbing players from the Kansas City Chiefs, which, again, smart. I mean, they're a team that has been in the AFC Championship 3 consecutive years in a row. They've been the back-to-back Super Bowls. They could very easily, considering they're on a, 8-9 game winning streak here, could end up put together another great playoff run and maybe win another championship. This player has not grabbed a single running back thus far. He has just been fully loaded on wide receivers, specifically of the Green Bay Packers, makes sense, and one Dallas Cowboys stack and then Mike Evans by his lonesome. Very interesting. I mean, again, any strategy can work. Really, any strategies can work, because it really is just, we're going to all be at the mercy of whether or not these players can just help their teams win. And if they win, then you'll get more value. If they don't, then we're in trouble. Now, speaking of trouble, Cole Beasley, Gabriel Davis, Cedric Wilson, the 3 guys that I potentially wanted to grab, have all just been picked up. So be it. That's something that's going to happen, and you're going to have to pivot accordingly in order to find yourself as much value as you can. Now, in order to do so, considering I have already selected and gotten some value into the Los Angeles Rams, I might want to grab a player like Tyler Higbee here, but again, a third tight end would be a little risky. I'm thinking probably going Hunter Renfrow as my other team in the AFC. Josh Jacobs is also still available. Could grab a third running back here. That's probably where I'll go. I will grab Hunter Renfrow. I will grab Josh Jacobs and just let it ride there. And those are my final 2 picks. With 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 5 wide receivers, that is my team's overall stability. It's a 2-team primary, right, where I wanted to prioritize Buffalo Bills and Dallas Cowboys with the potential pivot of Los Angeles Rams and Las Vegas Raiders. Hopefully, kind of gives you guys some insight as to how I approach it. Hopefully, you guys decide to check it out yourself. Again, use promo code Andrew today at Underdog Fantasy. There's a link down in the description of the video for those of you who are interested. Check that out. Draft today. And if you're interested in playing just more than an NFL playoff potential best ball league, there are other potential leagues to play in. Again, I'll go ahead and just immediately transition. There's the wild card Saturday and Sunday contest that you can see now to the left of me. They're pretty much, like, let's say, for example, this has 3 games involved. So all of the teams that you can potentially draft from, all the players, from those respective teams, Philadelphia versus Tampa Bay, San Francisco versus Dallas, and Pittsburgh versus Kansas City. You'll draft against other people. You draft players from those respective teams and try to capture, a piece of this prize pool with this overall entry. There's 5,000 entries total, and I'm sure that's going to fill up within the upcoming days. Not only that, I talked about pick'ems earlier. If you guys haven't checked out the pick'ems, there is a free special line for the NFL playoffs that you can use throughout the playoffs, but specifically, maybe you want to go ahead and use it right now. Stephon Diggs, over or under 1 reception. We all know that Stephon Diggs is going to get over 1 reception. But why not go ahead and get an automatic success for there, and then go ahead and just accompany that with any other performance? Because if you're able to do it, and you have a $25 maximum, you can 3 times your money there. Or, if you're able to somehow, some way, intelligently and luckily, successfully predict a 5-leg pick'em slip, then by all means, you can 20 times your overall money. Again, for those of you who are interested, check that out. Use promo code Andrew today. I want to thank you guys for watching. Tomorrow we'll have my NFL playoff predictions video out. And until next time, I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you. Peace.